Hey everybody, it's Lance and welcome back to Pastor's Bible Study. Okay, so it is heating up. We have finished the Last Supper. Jesus has let it be known that Judas is going to betray him. Things are about to get crazy, and that's where we pick up in Mark's Gospel, chapter 14, verse 26. They've gone over to the Mount of Olives, which is just a short distance away from the Temple Mount where these things have happened, and Jesus says to them, "You will all falter in your faithfulness to me. It is written, I will hit the shepherd, and the sheep will go off in all directions." He's quoting scripture there. "But after I'm raised up, I will go before you to Galilee." Peter said to him, "Even if everyone else stumbles, I won't." But Jesus said to him, "I assure you that on this very night, before the rooster crows twice, you, Peter, will deny me 3 times. But Peter insisted, "If I must die alongside you, I won't deny you." And they all said the same thing. Okay, so stopping right there, remember that as we've been coming closer and closer to the climax of this story in Jerusalem, Jesus has been saying to his disciples, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to be killed. I'm going to die. After 3 days, I will be resurrected. He's been telling this story over and over and over again. And now he's adding an additional element to the story that's very important. He's telling them, you are going to falter. You are going to run. You are going to fail. So imagine how hard it's been for the disciples hearing over and over again that the Christ that they are following, the Messiah that they are following, the miracle worker, the Son of God, the one whom they believe is restoring God's kingdom and fulfilling God's promises to Israel, he's going to die. He's going to be seemingly defeated. How incredibly hard has it been for them to hear that? Well, now how much harder is it also for him to say, and when things are going terrible, you're going to give up. You're going to falter. You're not going to have enough faith. You're not going to stick with me. You're not going to be strong. Imagine how that feels. I mean, put yourself in the position of the disciples and all they've given up and all they've experienced to follow Jesus and to know that when push comes to shove, you're not going to stand strong. And Jesus knows that. Now, why do you think it's important for Jesus to say that? I think it's very important for Jesus to say it because he knows what's going to happen, 1, but 2, he needs them to know that he knows what's going to happen. Not because he's trying to prove that he has this kind of power. It's obvious at this point. Rather, he needs them to know that the forgiveness and acceptance that he offers them isn't coming as a surprise to him. Does that make sense? He knows they're going to need acceptance. He knows they're going to need forgiveness. He knows they're going to need restoration back to him. That's part of his work. And of course, there's no better example of this than Peter. Think of Peter as kind of a lead disciple in many ways, both in his faithfulness and in his propensity to get things wrong often. And so in this moment of hearing that you're going to fail, Peter says, even if everyone else does, I won't. Even if it costs me my very life, I promise you, no matter what, I won't give up on you. I won't turn from you. And Jesus says to him, you're going to do that tonight. I promise you. So I want to pause right there. I want to pause and I want to ask you, if you're watching this with the group and you pause to discuss it, or whether you're just reflecting on this by yourself, what are some of the promises that we make ourselves about our own faithfulness? Have you ever been part of that? Have you ever said to yourself, I certainly wouldn't fail in that way. I certainly wouldn't get it wrong in that way, like so many others do, we sometimes tell ourselves. Well, what does it mean to you to know that Jesus knows our shortcomings, our failures, the places in which we don't live up to who we could be, and yet he still offers forgiveness and reconciliation? In fact, he knows that that's part of what's happening, and he's telling them right then, I'm going to go ahead of you to Galilee, meaning I still have work to do, and you're still a part of it. So what does it mean to you that Jesus already knows that that's going to be part of our story, their story, your story? Okay, picking back up. Verse 32, Jesus and his disciples came to a place called Gethsemane. Jesus said to them, sit here while I pray. He took Peter, James, and John along with him. He began to feel despair and was anxious. He said to them, I'm very sad. It's as if I'm dying. Stay here and keep alert. Then he went a short distance farther and fell to the ground. He prayed that, if possible, he might be spared the time of suffering. He said, Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Take this cup of suffering away from me. However, not what I want, but what you want. He came and found them sleeping. He said to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Couldn't you stay alert for 1 hour? Stay alert and pray, so that you won't give in to temptation. The spirit is eager, but the flesh is weak. Again he left them and prayed, repeating the same words. And again, when he came back, he found them sleeping, for they couldn't keep their eyes open, and they didn't know how to respond to him. He came a third time and said, Will you sleep and rest all night? That's enough. The time has come for the human one, or the Son of Man, to be betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let's go. Look, here comes my betrayer. This is one of the most powerful and vivid images that we have in the gospel. It's been recreated in art and film and literature so many times, and it's Jesus having this moment of coming fully face to face with where the rest of his story is going. Jesus has said, my path is leading toward arrest and crucifixion, execution, and death. He's known it, and now the time is here. And I just want to point out the importance of the element of Jesus's emotions and experiences here. One of the things that is Christian math that is a little bit hard to understand until you really absorb it in the entirety of the story is that Jesus is 100% human and 100% divine. And if that doesn't make perfect sense to you, that's okay. But it's important for you to understand in a moment like this, facing the reality of what is to come, Jesus experiences real suffering, real anxiety, real fear, and real loss. Jesus is 100% human, which means the emotions that you've experienced, the fears that you've experienced, the struggles that you've experienced resonate with him because he's actually been there. Part of the prayer that he prays that is so beautiful is acknowledging how hard this is. And in a perfect world, if possible, I wish it wasn't necessary. At the same time, God, I know that you're with me. I know that you're for me. Your will be done. And that's the truth of what all of our relationship with God is like. A perfectly appropriate prayer at any given time, particularly when we're in the midst of suffering, is, I wish this wasn't happening. I wish this would go away. I wish this wasn't the case. And at the same time, God, I know that you're with me, and I know that you're for me, and I know that you make all things come to wholeness in you, even if I don't see how quite yet. Jesus is modeling that kind of prayer and that kind of faith and that kind of humanity to us in that moment. So a lot of us, I think, feel like our Christian faith means we need to take everything in stride, right? We need to always look on the bright side of things and always just figure out it's going to be okay in some day, in some way. And one of the things I think Jesus models here really importantly for us is the reality of accepting the truth of this moment. Emotionally, wherever you are today, it is always okay to cry to the point of sweating blood, like we hear him in another gospel account. It's always okay to acknowledge, I am suffering and this is terrible and I wish that I wasn't. And the reality is, even in the midst of that, God is with you. And the fullness of that acknowledgement and that experience and that recognition of God's presence, well, that's the same path to healing that Jesus experiences that we're invited to follow. But we haven't reached that moment yet because we've also experienced Jesus being let down by his disciples, let down by the ones who are following him. Remember when he said that was going to happen just a few verses ago? Well, human weakness and frailty and inability to follow Jesus where he's going is already rearing its heads. And one of the things that he's frustrated with is that's just where we are. That's just the truth. They're trying and it's not enough. And he ultimately, does he get angry at them, reject them, right? Push them away? No. Let's see what happens next. Verse 43. Suddenly, while Jesus was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, came with a mob carrying swords and clubs. They had been sent by the chief priests, legal experts, and elders. His betrayer had given them a sign, arrest the man I kiss and take him away under guard. As soon as he got there, Jesus said to Jesus, Rabbi, and then he kissed him. Then they came and grabbed Jesus and arrested him. One of the bystanders drew a sword and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his ear. Jesus responded, "Have you come with swords and clubs to arrest me like an outlaw? Day after day I was with you, teaching in the temple, but you didn't arrest me. But let the scriptures be fulfilled." And all his disciples left him and ran away. One young man, a disciple, was wearing nothing but a linen cloth. They grabbed him, but he left the linen cloth behind and ran away naked. In another gospel account, we hear that Jesus heals and restores the ear of the man who had been injured. He doesn't want even a moment like this to be marred by unnecessary violence, and heals people who are coming to do him this kind of harm. And one of the things that Jesus does in this moment is make them look face to face at what they're doing. You had a million chances to actually arrest me or stop me or interfere, and yet you come in the garden this way with this sense of betrayal. Why are you doing it? You're doing it because you have something to hide. You're doing it because you're ashamed of what you're doing. You're doing it because you don't want your fear to be seen out in daylight in front of everybody else. Even in this moment, Jesus is inviting you to come face to face with what's actually going on, and that's what he does there in that moment. So Jesus has become arrested, becomes the next version of his story, and he's ultimately brought before the people who are bringing these charges to answer for them. And I want to make sure to read this. It's a lot of scripture for us to read in one session, but I think it's important to get through this much. They led Jesus away to the high priest, and all the chief priests, elders, and legal experts gathered. Peter followed him from a distance, right into the high priest's courtyard. He was sitting with the guards, warming himself by the fire. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for testimony against Jesus in order to put him to death, but they couldn't find any. Many brought false testimony against him, but they contradicted each other. Some stood to offer false witness against him, saying, "We heard him saying, 'I'll destroy this temple, constructed by humans, and within 3 days I will build another, one not made by humans.'" But their testimonies didn't agree even on this point. Then the high priest stood up in the middle of the gathering and examined Jesus. "Are you going to respond to the testimony these people have brought against you?" But Jesus was silent and didn't answer. Again the high priest asked, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?" Jesus said, "I am, and you will see the human one, the Son of Man, sitting on the right side of the Almighty and coming on the heavenly clouds." Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "Why do we need any more witnesses? You've heard his insult against God. What do you think?" They all condemned him. "He deserves to die." Some began to spit on him. Some covered his face and hit him, saying, "Prophesy." Then the guards took him and beat him. So it's important to realize, and we'll talk about this over the course of the coming studies, that Jesus is ultimately encountering two different forms of authority, and they're conspiring together to put him to death. This scripture reading focuses on the first group of authority. It's the religious authorities, the teachers who are ultimately considering themselves to be in charge of what it is to order the life of Israel around the right worship of God. These are the people who occupy places in the temple, elders, chief priests, scribes, those languages that we heard used there. And they find someone like Jesus incredibly threatening. Not only is he teaching different things in a new way, but he's claiming for himself a special kind of authority. And we hear right there the culmination. "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?" And Jesus says, "I am." Remember, I am is the name that God gives for God's self. So when Jesus says, "I am," every single person in that room understands what he's saying. He's not just saying, "Are you the Christ?" "I am." He's saying for himself, the name of God. He's claiming and identifying himself for who he actually is. And you will see the human one, or the Son of Man, sitting on the right hand of the Almighty and coming on the heavenly clouds. He's pointing there that he is the fulfillment of Scripture in Daniel chapter 7, the coming of the Son of Man on a heavenly cloud, the restoration of the Almighty, God providing, God's saving agent and grace for all of God's creation. Jesus is saying, the Scripture that you have studied for your entire lives has met its fulfillment in me. That's what he's saying to the people who hold the fate of his life in their hands. And that's ultimately what's going to lead to his crucifixion. Now, the people in the Sanhedrin aren't going to do it by themselves. They're going to get the Romans involved. That's what we're going to study next. But that's what I want you to hear here today, is that ultimately what seals the fate of Jesus' earthly ministry is his honesty about who he is, because people can't handle the idea of God actually being with us. It has to be looked at as blasphemy or rejected or incompatible with our understanding of the world. that God can be with us like this, in this way, and so people reject it. It's important to understand because humanity's rejection of God is going to be key in order to understand what God has overcome in the resurrection. Friends, I'm so glad that you're doing this Bible study with me, verse by verse. Can't wait to jump in with you on our next session. Thanks, and I'll see you soon.